There is a photograph that circulates every few months and stops people scrolling every single time. A snake, lying still, with an enormous bulge sitting in the middle of its body. And the bulge is not slightly wider than the snake. It is almost as wide as the snake itself, sometimes wider. A hard, rounded shape, pressing outward against the skin so hard that the scales have separated, and you can see pale lines of bare skin between them. It looks like a mistake. It looks like something that should not have been able to happen. The obvious question everybody asks is where exactly that went, and how. And the answer people usually give is short and confident and completely wrong. They say the snake unhinges its jaw. It dislocates the joint, swallows the meal, and then pops the jaw back into place afterwards. That explanation has been repeated in classrooms and documentaries for decades, and it is not true. Nothing is dislocated. No joint comes out of its socket. No injury occurs. A snake can do this several times a year for 20 or 30 years without ever damaging anything, which is not how dislocations work. The real answer is far stranger and far better because it is not one clever trick at all. It is at least 4 different systems working at the same time. The jaws are only the beginning. The rib cage of a snake is built on a completely different principle from yours. The skin does something that scales are not supposed to allow. And most surprisingly of all, the organs inside a snake were rearranged and displaced long before any of this ever happened, specifically to leave a corridor free. So let us go through it properly, from the mouth inward, and finish with what happens to that bulge over the following days, because that part contains the most extraordinary fact in the whole story. Dear viewers, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel with the bell. And now, let us continue. Start with the jaw, because that is where the myth lives. Look at your own lower jaw. It is a single bone. It began as 2 halves in the embryo, but those halves fused together at the front, at the chin, into one solid, rigid arch. That arch is a closed loop. Its width is fixed. You cannot widen it, and the only way to change its shape is to break it. Because that is the only jaw most people have ever thought about, everyone assumes every jaw works that way, and therefore assumes a snake must be breaking something. A snake's lower jaw was never fused. The 2 halves remain separate bones, joined at the front by a stretchy elastic ligament rather than by bone. It is not a closed arch. It is 2 independent bars tethered loosely at the tip, and they can spread apart sideways to a remarkable degree. Nothing has to leave a socket because there is no closed ring to break open. The mouth was designed from the start to widen. That is the first part. The second part is at the back of the skull, and it is just as important. In your head, the lower jaw hinges directly against the skull, and that is the end of the story. In a snake, there is a chain of mobile bones between the brain case and the jaw. The quadrate bone sits between them like a swinging strut, and above it sits another element that is itself mobile. So instead of one hinge, the snake effectively has a jointed arm holding its jaw, which both lengthens the gape and swings the whole jaw downward and outward. The entire skull is a loosely assembled set of movable parts rather than one solid helmet, and even the 2 sides of the upper jaw can move somewhat independently of each other. Now for the third part, which almost nobody mentions, and which is the actual secret. A snake does not swallow the way you do. You use your tongue and throat muscles to push food down. A snake does something closer to walking. It plants the teeth on one side of its mouth into the prey, then pulls that side backward while the opposite side releases, lifts forward, and takes a fresh grip further along. Then the sides swap. Left grips and pulls, right advances. Right grips and pulls, left advances. Over and over, in a slow, alternating rhythm, sometimes for well over an hour. The important consequence of this is that the snake is not pushing the prey into itself. It is pulling itself over the prey. The animal in its mouth is essentially stationary. The snake is the thing that moves, crawling forward around its meal like a sleeve being drawn onto an arm. Once you see it that way, the whole thing stops looking like a stunt and starts looking like locomotion. The teeth make this possible. They are not for chewing and not for cutting. They are thin, sharp, and curved sharply backward, and they are arranged in multiple rows, including rows running along the roof of the mouth. Functionally, they are a ratchet. Anything moving inward slides past them easily. Anything trying to move outward catches immediately. Once prey has started in, it structurally cannot come back out, which is also why a snake that grabs something too large sometimes cannot let go, even if it wants to. And there is one more piece of engineering that this whole process demands. If your mouth is completely packed for an hour or more, you cannot breathe through it. So the snake pushes its windpipe opening forward, out along the floor of the mouth toward the very front of the lower jaw, where it protrudes past the meal into open air. It is a snorkel built into the throat, extended on demand. The snake breathes calmly throughout, which is exactly why it can afford to take an hour and never panic. So the head is solved. But a prey animal as thick as the snake itself now runs into a much bigger problem, which is the body. In your chest, the ribs curve forward from the spine and meet at the front, attaching to the breastbone. That closes them into a rigid protective cage. It is excellent for protecting a heart and lungs, and terrible for changing your own diameter. The width of your chest is fixed by that closed loop of bone. A snake has no breastbone at all. Its ribs curve around from the spine and simply end, unattached, floating free at the front. The ring is open, and because the ring is open, the ribs can swing outward and sideways like the spokes of an umbrella opening, allowing the entire body wall to widen far beyond its resting diameter. There are also a great many of them. A snake carries a pair of ribs on almost every vertebra along most of its length, which in a large species means hundreds of pairs, each attached to the spine by a genuinely mobile joint rather than a stiff fusion. That matters enormously because it means the load of the bulge is spread across a huge number of independent, flexible points. No single joint takes a dangerous share of the strain. It is the difference between stretching one balloon and stretching a chain of hundreds of small linked segments. Then there is the skin, and here people get one detail backwards. The scales themselves do not stretch. They are stiff, keratinous plates, and they are essentially fixed in size. What stretches is the skin between them. At rest, the scales overlap like roof tiles, and the elastic interscalar skin is folded and hidden underneath. When a large meal passes through, the scales are forced apart, the folded skin unfurls, and you suddenly see pale bands of soft skin exposed between every scale. That is why a snake with a big meal inside it looks visibly lighter in color across the bulge and takes on that stretched net or mesh appearance. Nothing tore. A hidden reserve simply opened up. Meanwhile, the muscles of the body wall are not passive. They contract in a traveling wave, gripping the mass and moving it backward along the body toward the stomach. This is active transport, not gravity and not luck, and it is why a snake can swallow while climbing, while hanging vertically, or while lying upside down. Honest note, and it matters, this is not unlimited. Stretch has a ceiling, and snakes do occasionally attempt prey beyond that ceiling. The result is either a meal that jams partway and has to be brought back up, or, in the worst cases, tissue that tears internally, which kills the snake. The system is spectacular, but it has a hard edge, and animals do sometimes find it. Now for the part that surprises even people who already knew about the ribs in the jaw. The room was made in advance. A snake has no broad chest cavity and no roomy abdomen. It has a long, narrow tube. So the internal organs are not arranged side by side the way ours are, competing for width. They are arranged in a line, one after another, stretched out lengthwise along the body. Your organs are packed like items in a suitcase. A snake's organs are laid out like carriages on a train. Where an animal has a pair of something, the two are usually offset. Your kidneys sit at roughly the same level on either side of the spine. In a snake, one kidney sits noticeably closer to the head, and the other sits further back, staggered rather than parallel. That single change means two organs never have to occupy the same cross-section of a narrow body, which frees up width. The lungs are the most dramatic example. A snake typically has one enormous elongated functional lung, usually the right, running an extraordinary distance down the body. The left is drastically reduced, and in many species it is essentially absent altogether. One long, thin lung instead of two wide ones. The liver, likewise, is not a compact block, but a long, tapering strand stretched along the body axis. And the heart is loosely suspended compared to a mammal's, held with enough slack that it can shift position within the body when a large mass travels past. The organ physically moves aside to let the meal through, then settles back. Nothing in that snake is bolted down in the way you might assume. So when we say the snake makes room, that is not quite right. The room was designed in. The whole animal is a long, narrow corridor with the furniture pushed against the walls, and it was built that way before it ever met its first meal. Which brings us to what happens once everything is inside, and this is where it becomes genuinely astonishing. The stomach and intestine expand substantially to receive the mass, then gradually shrink back toward normal as digestion proceeds, which is why the bulge visibly migrates and shrinks over the following days. But they do not merely stretch. In large snakes, the digestive organs physically grow. Within a day or two of a big meal, the intestinal wall thickens, the absorptive surface increases enormously, and the liver, kidneys, and even the heart gain measurable mass. Metabolic rate leaps to many times the resting level. Then, once the meal is processed, all of it is dismantled again, and the organs shrink back down. The logic is pure economy. An animal that eats rarely cannot afford to run a large, expensive, fully staffed digestive system continuously between meals. So it does not. It keeps the machinery mothballed, builds it up on demand within hours of eating, runs it hard, and takes it apart again. A snake rebuilds part of its own body around every meal, and then unbuilds it. The chemistry is aggressive to match. Stomach acid strong enough to dissolve bone means most of the prey disappears entirely. What survives is keratin, so hair, feathers, hooves, and claws pass through largely undigested. The whole process takes anywhere from several days to a few weeks, depending on the size of the meal and, critically, on temperature. Warmth accelerates digestion enormously, and cold nearly stops it, which is why a snake that has just eaten will deliberately seek out a warm place and stay there. If it gets too cold, the meal can begin to rot inside it faster than the acid can work, which is dangerous and sometimes fatal. And throughout all of it, the snake is slow, heavy, and vulnerable, which explains a behavior that looks like waste. A snake that has swallowed a large meal and is then seriously threatened will often regurgitate the entire thing, abandoning days of work and an enormous energy investment, purely to get its speed back. Survival first, dinner second. So let us put the whole thing back together. A snake does not perform one trick. It runs 4 systems at once. The lower jaw was never fused into a closed arch, so its 2 halves spread apart on an elastic ligament, while a chain of mobile bones at the back of the skull swings the whole jaw wide, and backward hooked teeth ratchet the prey inward as the snake alternately walks its left and right jaws forward over the meal, breathing through a windpipe extended like a snorkel the entire time. The ribcage has no breastbone, so hundreds of pairs of mobile ribs swing outward like an umbrella instead of holding a fixed diameter. The scales themselves do not stretch, but the elastic skin folded away between them unfurls and lets the body wall widen. And the internal organs were laid out lengthwise and staggered from the outset, with paired organs offset, one lung reduced or gone, the liver drawn into a long strand, and the heart loose enough to slide aside as the meal passes. Then, once it is inside, the animal grows a bigger digestive system to deal with it and takes that system apart again when it is done. So the next time you see that photograph, remember the one thing that everybody gets wrong. Nothing was dislocated. Nothing was injured. The snake did not stretch itself to fit the meal in the moment it started eating. It was built for that meal in advance, in its jaws, its ribs, its skin, and the arrangement of its own organs, long before it ever met the animal it was going to swallow. Which part surprised you more, the walking jaws or the organs that grow and then shrink back again? Tell me in the comments. I read them. Ladies and gentlemen, right now on your screen there are 3 links. On the left is our newest video. In the center is a square link to our channel, and on the right is a whole playlist of stories just as interesting as this one. Give this video a like, share your opinion in the comments, and then go watch the rest of our videos. Thank you.